Well, good morning and welcome back. It's good to have you back on campus. And isn't it great to see these Christmas decorations? I love to see them all over the campus, and it's wonderful to sort of be surprised by them this morning. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about mathematics today, although I think mathematics is beautiful and certainly worth talking about. But I'd like to tell you about a friend of mine instead, a man named Mark. 6 years ago, my wife and I spent Thanksgiving in New York City. It's a great place to be in the holiday season. Although we had a great time enjoying life on the Upper West Side for a few days, it was actually a little bit of a bittersweet trip, as we knew that there was a difficult appointment waiting for us the following Monday afternoon. Mark, our friend of many years, was sick, but he didn't know how seriously sick he was. He had asked us to join him and some family members at a meeting with two doctors at Mass General Hospital. Earlier that fall, Mark had been diagnosed with liver cancer, and on this first Monday after Thanksgiving, he was expecting a detailed prognosis. The first doctor was Mark's oncologist, who came with a small cadre of residents and basically told Mark that he had inoperable liver cancer and recommended he start a treatment of chemotherapy and then see where we are in 6 months. The implication was that in Mark's case, merely getting through 6 months would be a victory. From there, we went to see a transplant surgeon who came accompanied only by a medical textbook. He explained Mark's situation, showing us diagrams in the book, and offered Mark the possibility of surgery that was so new that it would be the first time such an operation would be performed in this country. Mark faced a tough decision, but he opted for the surgery, even though there were no guarantees. It was a 20-hour operation, but it was successful. After a period of recovery, Mark was back on his feet and blew right by that 6-month anniversary. He was never truly free of cancer and kept being tested and received other treatments. However, for all practical purposes, he was given his life back. He worked a normal schedule, traveled, played golf, and pretty much was his old self. Now, chances are you didn't know Mark, but if you did, you would have liked him. Most people did. I met him when we first came to Gordon in the early 1980s, and Mark worked in the admissions office. Later, he became director of admissions, and we all marveled at his ability to know almost every student's name and many details about you all. He was always glad to see us, and he and his wife, Linda, were especially known for the warmth of their hospitality in their home. He didn't mind telling stories on himself either. One time he admitted that when they were traveling with European Seminar, a program that Gordon, that was very popular at Gordon in those days, he was traveling through Germany, and he kept noticing that nearly every town there was a street named Einbahnstraße, and he thought this was remarkable. And then he realized that in German, Einbahnstraße means one-way street. And we spent many holidays with Mark and Linda and their family, and last Easter, sometime around the wonderful dinner they had prepared, Mark admitted that his cancer was apparently returning and spreading more aggressively. That was confirmed later in the spring. In August, it became evident that the disease was winning, and Mark was admitted to hospice. In mid-August, just 2 weeks before he died, Mark entered Kaplan House, hospice's new facility in Danvers. As I watched Mark make his way through the rigors of dealing with his disease, I remember being impressed with him for several reasons. One was the courage he showed in confronting the cancer and his willingness to participate in various drug trials. Of course, he hoped they would help him, but he also knew they could bring help to others in the future. I was impressed with the way Mark relied on his faith and faced death with no fear. Throughout the day he died, which was the last Friday of August, friends and family kept a vigil in his room. Although Mark was not conscious that day, the atmosphere in the room varied from quiet contemplation of life without him to times of laughter as stories were told and memories recounted. Clearly, his attitude toward death had been conveyed to others. Finally, I was impressed by the steady stream of people who came to visit him during those last 2 weeks, some from as far away as the West Coast. In many cases, they came to say goodbye, and it was remarkable to see the strength Mark had to greet each one knowing that in many cases it would probably be for the last time. It was clear that Mark had been a good friend and an important friend to many people. But what does this have to do with the light? I remember going to Kaplan House the day before Mark died, as some of us were planning to gather in his room for a short Eucharistic service. As I drove over, there was a call-in show on public radio where the subject was a book. I can't remember the title of the book or even the author's name, but the topic was of religion and how the author had lost his faith. I remember thinking that this was a rather incongruous topic to be listening to as I drove to our service. Nevertheless, I was interested to learn that the reason for this man's departure from the faith wasn't some fundamental problem with the scriptures or any deeply held philosophical belief. Rather, his leaving the church and his faith was a result of people who claimed to be Christians, yet acted in ways that appeared to be contrary to the core beliefs that Christians claim. This brought another public radio experience to mind. Occasionally, their newscasts include commentaries on brief segments that are meant to be humorous. One from many years ago that I remember was given by a fellow who called himself Dr. Science. Now, Dr. Science typically asked a nonsense question, then offered a pseudo-scientific reply. On this particular segment, his question asked why it is that when you're in a lighted room and you open a closet door, that the light from the room enters the closet rather than the darkness from the closet entering the room. Now, I'm not sure that Professor Lee answered this question this morning. I'm sure there's an answer somewhere, but I don't know it. But I find it a very interesting question. In fact, if you ever did that and the darkness from the closet entered the room, we would expect that something was very wrong. Now, recently I've thought about this in relationship to the church, the fellowship of believers, which is supposed to bring light to the world. However, it sometimes seems that we're doing a better job of adding darkness, and that is also an indication that something is probably wrong. For instance, supporting policies that will deny health care to people, we contradict the teachings of Jesus and spread darkness. When we don't stand up for the oppressed, we spread darkness. When we claim to love the sinner but hate the sin, yet do so in a way that makes it awfully difficult to see where the love for the sinner really is, we spread darkness. I think this is what the author who lost his faith felt. Our friend Mark did not spread darkness. Just ask any of his friends. His was a welcoming and warm manner. His words and life were consistent with his faith, a lesson that I certainly need to remember. At his funeral, he was recognized as a person who embodied the essence of Christ's teaching. And isn't that a wonderful tribute that we would all desire to have said of us? At Mark's request, the gospel reading at the funeral was from John chapter 1, which is one of my favorite passages. As we were there remembering Mark's life, these words from John cause us to reflect on the source of light and light. In verses 4 and 5, we are told, "In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it." I think John 1 is a great choice for a scripture reading at a funeral, even though it's a passage that is typically associated with Christmas. We never know how long we have to do the work that God calls us to. Mark never made it to his 60th birthday, yet he spread light and not darkness. And now, here we are in Advent, when we're reminded of the source of that light. I know that this year, when I read John 1, or when John 1 is read at Christmas services, I will associate it with my friend Mark, and it will be especially relevant to me. My hope is that in this Advent season, we will not only take the time to intentionally prepare for the coming of the light, but will also strive to be people who truly bring light into the darkness. Thank you.